Hello, survivors. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the story. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our channel. We appreciate it, and thank you in advance. Please leave the name of the city you're listening from in the comment section below. It helps us see our reach in the community. Let's start the story. The call came in around 8:45 p.m. during my regular patrol of New Richland's quiet streets. Officer Nathan Reed here. Most folks just call me Nate. Until that night, the most exciting thing I dealt with in our small town was old Jim Baker's escaped chickens terrorizing Main Street. 911, what's your emergency? Dispatcher Katie's voice crackled through. Something's wrong at the Wilkinson farm, she said, her usually calm tone edged with concern. Richard's reporting multiple animal attacks. Says it's like nothing he's seen before. I turned my cruiser around, heading toward the outskirts of town. The Wilkinson farm sat about 3 miles out, tucked between rolling hills and dense woodland. As I drove, the setting sun painted long shadows across the empty fields, and an unusual stillness hung in the air. No birds, no distant barking, just the soft hum of my engine and the occasional static from the radio. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled up to the farmhouse. Richard Wilkinson stood on his porch, visibly shaken, anxiously scanning the tree line. I'd known him as one of the most level-headed farmers in the county. "Officer Reed," he called out, his voice tense. "Thank God you're here. Something's killed my cattle. But it's not like any animal attack I've ever seen." He described hearing strange noises from the pasture about an hour ago. "When I went to check, I saw something in the woods. Thought it was a person at first, but they moved wrong. Called out to them, but they just disappeared into the trees. Then I found my cattle." Richard led me to the back pasture. The metallic smell hit me first, that thick coppery scent of fresh blood. My flashlight revealed a grim scene, 2 prize Herefords torn apart with savage precision. Not the messy work of coyotes or wolves. These wounds were different. "Look at these marks," Richard said, pointing with his own flashlight. "Whatever did this was standing upright. And the bites, they're too big for any wild animal around here." The kills were fresh, couldn't have been more than an hour old. The blood hadn't even fully congealed. Examining the carcasses, I noticed something unsettling. The bite marks formed an odd pattern, unlike anything I'd seen before. A twig snapped in the darkness beyond my flashlight beam. I drew my sidearms, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, but I could feel eyes on me, that primal sensation of being watched by something hungry. I radioed for animal control and forensics, telling Richard to head inside and lock his doors until they arrived. As I walked back to my cruiser, the quiet of the night felt heavy, broken only by the occasional distant cricket. The radio crackled. Another call was coming in from the other side of town. More animal attacks, this time at the Morton place. Then another call. Strange noises near the high school. A fourth. Someone acting erratically outside the Quick Mart. My flashlight swept across the ground as I did a final check of the area. Near the edge of the woods, something caught my attention. Footprints in the mud. The pattern was odd, like someone had been dragging their feet. The radio crackled again. Deputy Wilson's voice came through, tight with tension. "Nate, you better get back to town. Something's happening at the hospital. Multiple reports of... I don't even know how to describe it, just get here." As I drove back toward town, my headlights swept across empty fields and farmland. The growing number of emergency calls suggested something wasn't right in New Richland tonight. I just didn't know what we were dealing with yet. The calls kept coming in as I drove back toward town, each report more disturbing than the last. Deputy Wilson's voice crackled through the radio again, tension evident in his usually steady tone. "Nate, we've got multiple disturbances at Memorial Hospital. Dr. Anderson says they've got patients acting aggressive, attacking staff. Security's overwhelmed." I pressed the accelerator harder, my cruiser's headlights cutting through the darkness. The hospital was on the other side of town, but something about the Quick Mart situation caught my attention. It was on my way, and the report mentioned erratic behavior, similar to what we were hearing from the hospital. The streets were unusually empty for a Wednesday night. The Sunset Diner, usually bustling with its regular crowd, sat dark and silent. The "open" sign still flickered in the window, but there wasn't a single customer inside. Even Pete's bar, which never closed early, had its lights off. As I approached the Quick Mart, I noticed several cars haphazardly parked in the lot, some with their doors still open. The store's fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over the empty parking lot. Through the large windows, I could see items scattered across the floor, knocked off shelves, spilled merchandise, but no movement inside. I radioed my position and grabbed my flashlight before stepping out. The night air felt thick, almost oppressive. A shopping cart rolled slowly across the lot, pushed by the gentle breeze, its wheels squeaking in the silence. The sound made me tense. Near the entrance, I found a cell phone lying on the ground, its screen cracked but still displaying multiple missed calls. Next to it, a set of car keys attached to a children's soccer ball keychain. The personal items scattered around the entrance told a story I wasn't sure I wanted to read. The automatic doors were stuck open, and as I approached, the smell hit me. Copper and something else. Something rotten. My flashlight beam revealed more chaos inside. The floor was slick with spilled drinks and what looked disturbingly like blood smears. A trail of groceries led toward the back of the store, as if someone had dropped their basket while running. "Police, anyone here?" My voice echoed through the empty aisles. No response. The security camera monitor behind the counter showed static on all screens. I moved carefully through the store, checking each aisle. The refrigerator cases hummed quietly, their light adding to the eerie atmosphere. In the back, near the stockroom, I found a staff door hanging off its hinges. The damage looked recent. The metal was bent outward, as if something had forced its way through with considerable strength. My radio crackled, making me jump. "All units, be advised. We have reports of multiple violent incidents across town. Backup requested at Memorial Hospital. Unknown number of casualties." Casualties. The word hung in the air like a physical presence. I was about to respond when I heard something from the stockroom. A wet sliding sound, followed by what might have been footsteps, but the rhythm was wrong. I swept my flashlight toward the noise, catching a glimpse of movement in the darkness. Something ducked behind a shelf. "This is Officer Reed," I spoke into my radio, keeping my voice low. "Possible suspect at Quick Mart, requesting immediate backup." The sound came again, closer now. I drew my weapon, tracking the noise. "Come out with your hands where I can see them." The response wasn't what I expected. A low, guttural noise echoed through the stockroom, followed by the crash of falling boxes. My flashlight beam caught movement to my right. Someone stumbling between the shelves. Their movements were stiff, almost mechanical. "Stop right there," I commanded, but they kept coming. The beam finally illuminated them fully, and my breath caught in my throat. It was Mike Henderson, the night manager. I recognized his uniform and name tag, but something was terribly wrong. His skin had a grayish tinge, and dark fluid stained the front of his shirt. His movements were uncoordinated, yet purposeful, like a malfunctioning machine. Mike, can you hear me?" He turned toward my voice, and I saw his face. His eyes were glazed over, pupils blown wide, unseeing yet somehow focused directly on me. A string of dark saliva dripped from his mouth, which hung open at an unnatural angle. The side of his neck bore a massive wound, the flesh torn and mangled. He shouldn't have been able to stand, let alone move. But he was moving, and moving toward me with increasing speed. I backed away, keeping my weapon trained on him. "Stop where you are. Final warning." Mike's only response was another inhuman sound as he lurched forward. I retreated through the store, trying to maintain distance. He followed, knocking over displays with unnatural strength. His hands reached out, grasping at the air between us, fingers curled like claws. I made it to the front of the store, but Mike was between me and the exit. That's when my radio burst to life again. "All units, code 3. Multiple officers down at Memorial Hospital. The situation is..." The transmission cut off in a burst of static. The distraction cost me. Mike crossed the distance faster than I thought possible. I barely had time to react as he lunged at me, teeth snapping. I stumbled backward, tripping over a fallen display. My flashlight clattered to the ground. its beams spinning wildly across the ceiling as I scrambled away. The sound of approaching sirens pierced the night. Mike's head snapped toward the noise, giving me the opening I needed. I bolted for the door, not looking back until I reached my cruiser. Through the store windows, I could see him following, moving with that same terrible purpose. I grabbed my radio, hands shaking slightly. "Dispatch, we need hazmat and medical response teams. Something's very wrong here. Tell all units responding to use extreme caution. These people, they're not responding to commands, and they're attacking on sight." As I sped toward Memorial Hospital, my mind raced to make sense of what I'd just seen. The wound on Mike's neck, his inhuman behavior, the violence spreading across town. None of it added up to anything rational. But one thing was becoming clear. New Richland was facing something unlike anything we'd trained for. The hospital's emergency lights pulsed in the distance, casting red flashes across the darkening sky. Multiple police units had their lights on, but there was no movement around them. The parking lot was a maze of abandoned vehicles, and as I got closer, I could see dark stains on the pavement. Too many dark stains. Whatever was happening at the Quick Mart wasn't an isolated incident, and I had a sinking feeling that this night was about to get much worse. Memorial Hospital loomed ahead, its emergency lights painting crimson patterns across the parking lot. 3 police cruisers sat abandoned near the entrance, their doors hanging open. Through the glass doors of the ER, I could see papers scattered across the floor and an overturned wheelchair blocking the hallway. I radioed dispatch. No response, just static. The hospital's security gate was raised, unusual for this time of night. As I pulled up, my headlights swept across dark patches staining the pavement. Equipment lay scattered. A fallen IV stand, medical supplies, a single shoe. The ambulance bay stood empty except for one vehicle, its back doors wide open. A stretcher lay toppled beside it, its white sheets stained and trailing on the ground. The radio inside the ambulance crackled with fragmented transmissions, dispatch trying to reach units that weren't responding. "Wilson?" I called out, keeping my voice low. My fellow officers had to be here somewhere. The silence that answered set my teeth on edge. The emergency room entrance had a handprint smeared across the glass. Inside, the front desk was deserted. A coffee cup still steamed on the counter. Half-finished paperwork spread out beside it. The waiting room chairs were overturned, some stacked against a side door as if someone had tried to barricade it. A ceiling light flickered in the hallway, creating dancing shadows. The nurses' station computer screens glowed with abandoned patient charts. One monitor displayed security camera feeds, most showing empty corridors, but one caught my attention. The feed from the second floor showed several figures milling aimlessly in the hallway. A sharp bang echoed from somewhere deeper in the building, followed by the sound of shattering glass. I drew my weapon, moving toward the noise. The hallway stretched ahead, lit by emergency lighting that cast everything in a dim red glow. Room by room, I found signs of struggle, medical charts torn from walls, equipment knocked over. A crash cart lay on its side, its contents spilled across the floor. In one room, the window was broken from the inside, shards of glass glinting on the windowsill. The elevator at the end of the hall dinged. I pressed myself against the wall, watching as the doors slid open, empty. But as they began to close, I noticed dark marks on the elevator floor, drag marks leading out into the hall. Following the trail, I found Wilson's badge, the metal surface scratched and flecked with dried blood. Next to it lay his radio, still transmitting soft bursts of static. I picked up both, clipping the radio to my belt. The trail continued around the corner. A door banged somewhere above, followed by running footsteps. A voice called out. Dr. Anderson, the chief of emergency medicine. "Up here, second floor, we're trapped." I found the stairwell, taking the steps 2 at a time. The second floor door was barricaded from the other side. Through the small window, I could see Dr. Anderson and 3 nurses huddled in a break room across the hall. Between them and the stairwell, several figures shambled back and forth. Dr. Anderson caught my eye through the window. He held up a notepad with hastily scrawled words. "Bite victims, fever, aggression, spreading fast." I nodded, gesturing for him to stay put. The door's reinforced glass wouldn't hold forever, but it was safer than trying to run. I keyed my radio, hoping someone might hear. "This is Officer Reed at Memorial Hospital. I need immediate backup. Multiple casualties, unknown number of hostile subjects. Medical personnel trapped on second floor." Static answered, broken by a single garbled word. "Quarantine." Movement at the end of the hall caught my attention. A figure stepped out of a darkened room. Officer Wilson. Relief flooded through me until he turned. His uniform was torn, revealing a massive bite mark on his shoulder. His skin had taken on an ashen color, eyes vacant yet alert. His hands, usually steady on his weapon, now curved into rigid claws. My voice caught in my throat as I watched my friend, or what remained of him, stagger forward. His movements carried the same mechanical quality I'd seen in Mike at the Quick Mart. Behind him, more figures emerged from the shadows. Drawn by my presence, I backed toward the stairs, mind racing. Wilson had been fine less than an hour ago. Whatever this was, it spread fast. Too fast. A scream pierced the air from below, followed by the sound of breaking glass. More were entering the building. Dr. Anderson gestured frantically from the break room, pointing down the hall. A fire escape. Before I could move, the stairwell door burst open behind me. A nurse in blood-stained scrubs lunged forward, teeth bared. I barely managed to slam the door shut, but others were already pounding against it. The hallway was filling with more of them now, blocking my path to the fire escape. Wilson led the pack, his badge still clipped to his ruined uniform, catching the emergency lights as he approached. My radio crackled again. Through the static, I caught fragments of transmissions from across town. Overrun at the high school. Multiple casualties. Evacuation point compromised. No response from National Guard. The reality of our situation began to sink in. This wasn't just happening at the hospital. The entire town was falling. And based on the garbled transmissions I was hearing, help wasn't coming. Dr. Anderson's note had used the word spreading. Looking at Wilson, at the bite marks visible on each of these former people, I finally understood. Every person they caught became one of them. The infection passed through bites, turning victims within minutes. The pounding on the stairwell door grew louder. Metal groaned as hinges began to give way. I had moments to decide. Try to save the medical staff, or find another way out. Either choice could be fatal. A fluorescent light burst overhead, showering sparks across the corridor. In that momentary flash, I saw dozens of them filling the hallway. Their shadows danced on the walls, a macabre parade of what used to be the people of New Richland. The night had started with a simple animal attack call. Now I stood in a hospital corridor, watching my friend and fellow officers transformed into something out of a nightmare, and dawn was still hours away. The realization hit hard. These weren't people anymore. Looking at Wilson's transformed face, I made the choice. "I'm sorry," I whispered, raising my weapon. The shot echoed through the corridor. Wilson dropped, and for a moment the others paused, as if confused by the sound. I used that moment to act. "Dr. Anderson, the far window, fire escape, now." They didn't hesitate. As the group rushed from the break room, I provided cover fire, each shot precise and deliberate. No time for hesitation, no room for mercy. These weren't my friends or neighbors anymore, just shells driven by a primal need to spread their infection. Once the medical staff reached the fire escape, I backed away from the growing horde. More were pouring in from both ends of the hallway now. We descended the metal stairs quickly, the structure clanging with each step. "The parking lot's overrun," Dr. Anderson said, pointing to the gathering crowd below. "We need another way out." I led them around the building to where I'd parked my cruiser. "Get in." The group piled into the back seat while I kept watch. An ambulance crew member, or what was left of them, emerged from behind a parked car. I put them down with a single shot. Once everyone was inside, I gunned the engine, swerving around abandoned vehicles. "The station," I said, catching Dr. Anderson's eye in the rearview mirror. "It's fortified, has weapons, supplies. We can regroup there." As we drove through town, the scope of devastation became clear. Cars littered the streets, some still running with doors open. Store windows were shattered. Blood stained the sidewalks. Small groups of infected wandered aimlessly until they spotted movement, then charged with frightening speed. We turned onto Cedar Street, passing St. Michael's Church. Light spilled from its stained glass windows, and I could hear screams coming from inside. People were alive in there. "We have to help them," one of the nurses pleaded. I pulled up to the church entrance. "Stay in the car, keep the doors locked." The massive wooden doors stood partially open, voices echoing from within. I approached cautiously, weapon ready. Inside, the scene drove the air from my lungs. Pews were overturned, hymnals scattered across blood-stained floors. The altar was destroyed, and hanging from the balcony was a torn banner that read, "Emergency Shelter." Bodies lay strewn throughout, some still, others twitching as the infection took hold. A group of survivors huddled in the choir loft, while below, at least 24 infected milled around. Among them, I recognized Pastor Davies, his clerical collar stained dark, movements rigid as he prowled the aisles. More screams drew my attention to the basement stairs. Another group was trapped down there, crying for help, but there were too many infected between us and them. Even with my remaining ammunition, I couldn't clear a path. My training said to help, to save everyone possible. But experience from the last few hours taught a harsher lesson. Trying to save everyone would get us all killed. I backed toward the entrance, the weight of my decision pressing down like lead. The heavy doors, solid oak, steel reinforced, could contain them, keep them from spreading further. I pushed them closed, the sound drawing attention from the infected inside. They rushed forward, but too late. The locks engaged with a heavy click. Fists pounded against the wood. Screams, both human and inhuman, filtered through. Each one felt like a physical blow, but I forced myself to turn away. Sometimes survival meant making impossible choices. Back in the cruiser, no one spoke as we drove away from the church. They'd heard the screams too. Dr. Anderson placed a hand on my shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of the burden. The station came into view, a 2-story brick building with barred windows and security doors. Several police vehicles were parked haphazardly outside. The front entrance was secure, but the side door stood open, light spilling onto the pavement. I radioed ahead. "This is Officer Reed, coming in with survivors. Anyone copy?" After a moment of static, a familiar voice responded, "Reed, thank God. Get in here quick, we've got the building locked down." We pulled around back where Officer Claire Martinez waited by the door, rifle ready. She covered our approach as we rushed inside. The station was transformed. Desks pushed against windows, ammunition boxes stacked near defensive positions. Evidence lockers had been emptied, their contents distributed among the survivors. "What's your status?" I asked Claire as she secured the door behind us. "It's bad. Cooper's up in dispatch. A few civilians made it here early on, everyone else." She shook her head. "The National Guard's not coming. Last transmission said they're setting up quarantine zones, but nothing about evacuation. We're on our own." She led us to the briefing room, now serving as a command center. Maps covered the walls, marked with outbreak locations and overrun areas. Officer David Cooper worked the radios, trying to contact anyone outside town. A handful of civilians huddled in corners, eyes haunted. "We've got 15 handguns, 6 shotguns, 3 rifles, and whatever ammunition we could gather," Claire reported. "Food and water for maybe a week. Medical supplies are limited." Dr. Anderson stepped forward. "I can help with that. We brought what we could from the hospital." I studied the map while they talked. Red marks showed where the infection had been reported, practically everywhere. Blue circles indicated possible safe zones, but most were crossed out. The station sat in one of the last clear areas. "The cells are secure if we need to fall back," Cooper called from dispatch. "Steel doors, independent ventilation. We can hold out there if necessary." A civilian, I recognized him as Tom from the hardware store, spoke up. "Hold out for what? Help's not coming, we need to leave town." "Roads are blocked," Claire replied. "We tried earlier. The highway's a parking lot, and the infected are everywhere. Running isn't an option." I checked my ammunition, counting rounds. Then we defend what we have. Set up watches, conserve supplies, stay quiet, and wait for the infected to weaken or wander off. They don't weaken, Dr. Anderson interjected. At the hospital, we observed several cases. Their bodies keep moving long after they should have shut down. No pulse, no respiration, just constant aggressive motion. The implications settled over the room like a heavy blanket. We weren't just waiting for rescue or for the crisis to pass. We were facing something entirely new, something that defied natural law. Claire pulled me aside, her voice low. We're getting reports from other towns. It's not just here. The infection is everywhere, spreading faster than anyone can contain it. I looked around the room at our small group of survivors. The station might protect us for now, but eventually, we'd need supplies. Eventually, we'd have to face what waited outside. A scream echoed from somewhere in town, quickly silenced. Through the barred windows, I could see figures shambling in the darkness. More joining their ranks every hour. The world we knew was ending, transformed in a single night. And in our fortified station, surrounded by the remnants of civilized society, we could only wait and watch as New Richland fell to the infected. Cooper's voice cut through our strategic discussion. Got another signal. Family of 4 barricaded in their basement on Maple Street. He adjusted the radio dials, trying to maintain the weak connection. They're running out of options. We can't save everyone, Claire said, her voice heavy with the weight of previous attempts. We lost Phillips trying to reach that group at the supermarket. Dr. Anderson stepped forward, spreading out a town map on the desk. New Richland's population is just over 1,000. If this infection spreads through bites, every person we save is one less infected we have to face. He was right. The math was simple but brutal. Each person turned meant another threat on the streets. Each survivor saved meant one less monster to fight. Cooper, I called out. Can you broadcast on the emergency frequency? He nodded, adjusting the equipment. Range isn't great, but it should cover most of the town. Do it. Tell everyone who can hear us to stay inside, barricade their doors and wait. Tell them. I paused, choosing my words carefully. Tell them this is a police emergency, and help is organizing. Give them hope, but make it clear. Going outside means death. While Cooper crafted the message, Claire and I took stock of our defenses. The station's architecture worked in our favor. Limited entry points, reinforced windows, clear sight lines. We positioned armed survivors at key points, establishing a rotation for watch duty. The radio crackled as Cooper's message went out. This is the New Richland Police Department. We are establishing a secure zone. Stay in your homes. Barricade all entries. Do not attempt to reach the station. Repeat, stay in your homes. This is not a drill. If you can hear this message, respond on emergency channel 3. Responses trickled in, scattered survivors across town, each hiding in their own pocket of safety. Cooper logged their locations on the map, creating a picture of who might still be alive out there. A crash from outside interrupted our planning. Through the window, we spotted a group of infected hammering at the barricades. Their attacks had grown more concentrated, as if drawn by the signs of life within. They're testing our defenses, Claire observed, raising her rifle. Hold your fire, I warned. Sound draws more of them. We only shoot if they break through. The pounding continued, metal groaning under the assault. We watched in tense silence as more infected joined the group, their combined force starting to bend the reinforced shutters. Side entrance, Tom called out. They're breaking through the emergency exit. I rushed over with Claire, finding several infected pushing against the door. Their combined weight was making the hinges creak. We braced the door with a heavy desk, buying ourselves more time. The radio squawked behind us. Multiple breaches reported downtown. The hardware store's emergency shelter is compromised. At least 30 people were inside. 30 more infected added to the hunting packs. The thought made my stomach turn. Back downstairs, Dr. Anderson was organizing our medical supplies while explaining what he'd learned. The infection spreads fast, minutes from bite to turn. But they're not smart, just aggressive. They react to sound, movement, but they can't plan or problem solve. Which means we can outsmart them, Claire added, her tactical mind working. Use their behavior against them. A sharp crack echoed from the front, one of the barricade panels giving way. Through the gap, hands reached in, clawing at the air. We had seconds before they breached the outer defenses. "Everyone to positions," I shouted, raising my weapon. "Remember your training. Headshots only, conserve ammunition." The panel buckled, then tore free. Infected poured through the opening, a wave of snarling, twisted forms. We opened fire, coordinated bursts dropping the first wave, but more pushed through, climbing over their fallen. Claire's shotgun roared beside me, the blast taking down 3 at once. Tom and the other civilians provided supporting fire from elevated positions, their aim improving with each shot. Cooper's voice rose above the gunfire. "More responses coming in. People are hearing us. Families in basements, survivors in attics. They're staying put, waiting for our signal." That news fueled our determination. Each person safely hidden was one less we'd have to fight, one more we might eventually save. The battle for the station raged for what felt like hours. Wave after wave of infected crashed against our defenses. We held them back, sealing breaches, reinforcing weak points, never letting them gain a foothold. Dawn's first light crept through the windows, illuminating the aftermath. Bodies littered the ground outside, former friends and neighbors we'd been forced to put down. But the station held. We'd proven it could be defended. As the sun rose, the number of infected outside gradually decreased, their masses thinning as they spread throughout other parts of town. We used this brief respite to fortify our position, learning from the night's weaknesses. Cooper maintained radio contact with the hidden survivors, offering advice and encouragement. Dr. Anderson treated the wounded and studied the infections patterns. Claire organized defense rotations and weapon training for the civilians. Looking at our small group of defenders, I saw something change in their eyes. The shock and horror of the night was giving way to determination. We weren't just survivors anymore. We were becoming a resistance. "The station's secure," Claire reported, checking our ammunition reserves. "We can hold this position indefinitely if we're smart about it." I nodded, studying the map with its marked locations of surviving citizens. The station is just the beginning. Every person out there who's still alive is counting on us. We've proved we can defend one building. Now it's time to take back our town. Through the window, I could see infected still wandering the streets of New Richland. They'd taken our neighbors, our friends, turned our quiet town into a nightmare. But they hadn't taken our will to fight back. We had a secure base, a growing understanding of our enemy, and most importantly, hope. The sun climbed higher, marking the end of the longest night in New Richland's history, and the beginning of our fight to reclaim it. The war for our town was just beginning, but for the first time since that initial call to the Wilkinson farm, I believed we had a chance to win it.